the slideshow. So yeah, so here we are, session 3, halfway through a brief 6-session lunchtime chat. And this series has the similar format for each of these 6 sessions. We're going to have a 15-minute micro training, some time for discussion in small groups, some next steps with homework for those of you that are working on implementation or walking through this 1 week at a time, and then we'll review and preview for next week. So today's brief micro training is about school risk data and prevention programs. And then next week, we're going to talk about progress monitoring, where I'll review a couple of commercial products, also show you how to do your own if you'd like. Week 5, we're going to talk about how to best support teachers during these really challenging times. And then the last session will be all about assessment and interventions. So what I want to start by saying is, again, I'm Kimberly Vannest. I'm a professor, distinguished scholar here at University of Vermont and the department chair. I started this work about, oh gosh, I guess it's going on 30 years now, when I was a high school teacher in Southern California and struggled with what to do with students who were showing risk for or demonstrating chronic emotional and behavioral problems. And it put me on a path of engaging in research and working with schools all over the country to use universal screening and evidence-based practices for what we were doing to help students better function in school settings, in community and home settings. Please note that I am the author of some of the materials that we're going to discuss today. So while I believe my comments and opinions to be factual and evidence-based, you should take care to judge the evidence for yourself and make an independent decision regarding any diagnostic or intervention material selection and use. And this talk is based on decades of research and experience working with schools since 1989 when I started teaching. And so my my wisdom that I want to share with you is that sometimes it's okay to go slow, to go fast. We're in such a period of sometimes what feels like panic or crisis in schools, really deep challenges for faculty and staff shortages, for students with a variety of deep and complex needs, all exacerbated by COVID and the pandemic, which is looking different in every single state. So for these programs to take hold and to be sustainable, I think it's really important that we give ourselves time to set up the foundation so that they can stick. We have a huge opportunity to make a giant difference in the lives of the students and families that we serve, but we only do that if we do it really well. And sometimes it's okay to go slow in order to go fast later. I think we need to get off the jumping around at shiny things and from one wagon to another, and recognize the expertise that's in the room, in all of you, and to develop that in a way that builds capacity long term. Sometimes there's a slight delay in my computer moving forward. So I want to set up the framework here when we're talking about risk data at the school level and prevention programs, that risk is not located within a child, that risk is in part the mismatch between what a child needs and what environmental resources are available. And so I'm asking that you consider this framework as we discuss how school systems can better meet the needs of students, families, and educators. Because if we think of risk in terms of an individual characteristic, I believe we run the risk of setting up really unequal systems of care for students and their families. So prevention programs, in which I'll include universal screening, are not about early identification for special education. They are about preventing what may be special education later for some students, about preventing discipline problems, but also about better equipping all of the students that we serve in school systems to have improved social, emotional, and behavioral functioning so that they can meet their greatest capacity and the expectations of those around them. So I want to start with this, that leadership teams are really key. Each campus level needs a leadership team to best develop and implement prevention programs at the school site level. In part because we want to avoid the one person, one mission mistake that can so often happen when we have a highly enthusiastic and skilled, knowledgeable school psychologist or counselor or nurse or principal or vice principal or a great behavior coach or interventionist or a fabulously charismatic special education teacher or a great parent volunteer. Whenever one person is driving this kind of reform or agenda, these types of systems will live and die with just that one person. And there's so much turnover and there's such a need for this kind of programming everywhere that if you can get a leadership team involved to sustain it, you'll be investing your resources more wisely. Part of the need for that leadership team is to help educate and avoid misconceptions. And here are a few of them that I've encountered in my years of doing this in schools. First is that universal screening or prevention programs are not about setting up IEPs or functional behavioral assessments for all students, or all students at risk are now going to be considered on the pathway or the pipeline to special education services. That's not what this is about at all. Instead, this is really about early intervention and creating the opportunity for small supports, small educational interventions that make a big difference long term. We know that in our communities, 1 in 4 people will struggle with anxiety and depression as an adult, and we rarely teach or train kids in a school system the language, vocabulary, or even basic self-care needed to avoid those kinds of bigger problems once they get out in the world. We need these leadership teams to also be able to provide information to educators and families that that doing a prevention program means that somehow we have discipline problems that are pervasive. That's not it at all. We don't engage in prevention programs because our schools are a mess or they've run amok. We're doing this because internalizing and externalizing risk is important to identify early. And we know that the earlier we identify and provide services, education, strategy training, the less likely these things are going to be to exacerbate and create chronic long-term needs. We also need leadership teams to be able to talk to people that who might think that this is all about COVID and it's going to go away soon. This is not about COVID or the pandemic. Needs for internalizing and externalizing problems in the student population have always been there. 1 in 4 pediatric visits has a behavioral referral to the component to the pediatric need. We have a tremendous amount of student need that is unidentified. So this is about recognizing that social, emotional, and behavioral challenges impact academics, and that we do a better job as schools in educating our future generations when we address the whole child and all of the aspects that go into educating a student. I see a couple of comments in the chat room. It looks like some hellos from different places. Great to see everybody. So I'm going to put up a quick survey and ask for your interactive participation here. There are 2 questions. Here's the first one. Do you have a team that leads and supports emotional and behavioral risk or risk reduction efforts at your school? Yes, no, not sure. And then a second question. Do you feel like the team is functional? Is it working? Yeah, thanks so much for for putting in your answers here. Around 60% look like they have the participants. If you want to participate, now would be the time. Great, thanks for sharing. A couple of you aren't sure, totally get that. You might be at a district level or new to a system. Give you another minute or so here. If you want to participate, now's the time. So we've got about 66% of you saying yes, you do have a team in place. And it looks like a half and half here. Some not sure if it's functional, half, almost half. And then 33% saying no, not functional, 20%, 1 in 5 saying yes, functional. Yeah, anybody want to put in the chat some comments on this? Thanks so much, Bonnie. Some admin would think we have a team, but I would disagree. Yeah, it's different between assigning a group of people or having a team that is voluntold they're going to participate on a team. That's very different than an actual team, isn't it? How about some of your thoughts in the chat room? Down in the middle of your page, you should see a chat box or a chat symbol. Then you'll be able to type in if you want. All right, so not a lot of chatter on this topic. How many of you, just by show of like one of the graphics in the chat room, how many of you are on a team if you have a team? Any thumbs up, thumbs down? Sort of, yeah. Okay, I don't want to force people to participate here. It may feel a little uncomfortable since it's a group setting, and that's okay too. Or you may just be in a situation where you're listening. Couple of teams across district. Thanks, Calvin. Alvin. Sorry. Thanks, Alvin. Appreciate it. Francis, good to hear from you. Not part of the school team. Okay, good. Solid prevention programs, for them to have a good uptake and stick, need a leadership team behind them. Again, not just one super charismatic person that maybe can do it all, but it won't work out well for you in the long term. So we need a leadership team. We need multiple people that are knowledgeable across the variety of topics, things like behavior. Maybe they're applied behavior analyst, behavior coach. Maybe they have degrees in this. Someone that's knowledgeable about having an equity lens in what's happening. Maybe someone who has a restorative or trauma-based background. We need knowledgeable content area people on that team for putting together prevention programs. And then we need folks that are also trained in or understand systems and implementation. They know how to make things work in the particular school settings or context where you're working. We need people that are committed to this process, not voluntold to do this. I've been on a lot of teams that sometimes brand new teachers or teachers who might be struggling with behavior management in their classroom end up getting put on this kind of a team, maybe because administrators think that by doing so, they're going to increase the skill sets of that person. That's really not who should be on a leadership team. It should be the top people in this area that can lead the activity. And ideally, these are folks that are respected by faculty and staff, parents on campus, and that they have some kind of skills and are able to coach others. So here's your ideal scenario for leadership team. And that they have and can help recruit a shared vision and buy-in from the stakeholders that they work with. It's good to plan on having regular meetings, whether those are monthly or every couple of weeks. And I think what works best for team development is to have a year-long goal and publicly available agendas. So where do you want to get to with this team at the end of the year? And where are you going to house those agendas about what you discuss and who's involved in those discussions? And then identifying or accessing how these teams are going to be resourced. Is it going to be release time from a schedule? Is it going to be after school or before school time that's compensated? Is this going to be uncompensated time? And how is this going to work in terms of any needs that they have? So Francis shares with us that leadership teams are administrators and teachers, and they've gone through county ed training for improving their school set. So maybe a region center, and the school can bring in experts that train but not assist in actual implementation. A very common model. Thanks, Francis. That year-long goal and public agenda is really helpful in keeping a team on track for what they are trying to do. It's very easy for teams to, when they're developing prevention programs or implementing prevention programs, to have kind of scope creep. And that means that any new thing that comes up, that team might get tagged with, and you can get taken off task or chasing down rabbit trails and miss out on the initial mission of what the team was put together to do, which is, in this case, we're talking about setting up a prevention program that is universal for all students. So one of the first things that the leadership team needs to engage in is creating or adopting some kind of social norms or explicit expectations. This can be school-wide expectations that we're using for students, but I'm describing this as broader here, and more than just be safe, be respectful, but to identify these things as the norms and how we're going to treat one another and interact with one another and at schools. And I'll get to the reason for that in a minute. But these explicit expectations need to not just be for the students, but also for the faculty and staff. If you have a very small committee that does this, I would suggest, and the literature and research certainly supports the idea of having an opportunity for people to weigh in and to have a transparent process to develop buy-in. You can do that through videos, you can do that through artwork, student artwork, faculty artwork. You can do voting, and there are a number of guidelines out there about what level of support that you need to be able to move forward, and it's above 80% of the faculty buying in and being able to move this agenda forward. It's important to take the time to have those discussions about why are we doing this? Why do we feel the need to do this? What benefits do we expect to see? And to set aside some time or some themes for those conversations. Maybe they're in affinity groups. Maybe they're talking about discipline. Maybe they're talking about something that's specific to the community economically. And to recognize that multi-year goals are involved in this kind of a process, that this level of school change or working with students in prevention programs doesn't happen in one 9-month period, but that this takes multiple years of commitment. It's also an opportunity to give time to voicing that the rationale that this is beyond student compliance or safety, but about a bigger picture of equity and justice. I think that's particularly salient in our current climate and important to consider when we're looking at what our social norms or school-wide expectations are going to be. What do we want to get out of this, and where do we want to be as a school or school district 3 years and 5 years from now? We want to avoid this repeated investment in re-breaking the ground every year but rather set up a culture that will support a sustainable system. I think that part can't be underemphasized. As a team, a leadership team, when you get ready to roll out, you've accomplished some things with buy-in. You've given people ample time to invest or reinvest or rediscuss school-wide expectations or social norms. Think about how you're going to engage in clear and explicit communication. How are these norms and expectations going to be conveyed? Are they banners? Are they posters? I don't think it's enough to put things in people's boxes and expect that they're going to be implemented in a way that is universal or with any kind of enthusiasm or fidelity. How will they be taught and practiced? And what opportunities are educators, administrators, staff going to have to engage with one another about what's going well and what's not going well in our classrooms? I've seen a number of teams have great cohesive planning. They roll out and they don't think about or didn't provide the idea that if something's not working or needs to be tweaked, when and how it might get revisited, so that a school feels like they are participating in the rollout practice and not just implementing what somebody else decided that teachers were going to do. And in that process, how will caregivers and communities weigh in order to build a sustainable vision for this type of work? And where is that going to show up on campus? What's this systematic, planful way that we have to connect with community leaders and to say that these social norms reflect our communities? And then how are educators supported in practicing with one another and with students? Sometimes the things we think are going to be great systems on rollout can have problems that we didn't foresee. And I'll give you an example from my own experiences of using token economy systems and then having kids set up a loan sharking system where the tokens were being loaned at interest rates that were exorbitant, being used for gambling and a whole number of things because they were considered high value. So on the one hand, the tokens were valued and that part of the system was working, but it created a whole set of like secondary problems that I hadn't foreseen and needed to re-engage with people about how we were going to implement this. So where, if you set up systematically ahead of time, the opportunity for people to participate in the revisioning of this, I think you'll have better success. Additional considerations for the leadership team and those discussions. How are adults modeling the norms developed by the larger community? And what happens if this breaks down? So here are some illustrations that I've observed in schools. Science teachers in conflict over lab space, pretty vocal, pretty public conflict that didn't actually model the norms or the school-wide expectations that were being set up for all of the students to follow. So we had a situation of do as I say, but not as I do. Ninth grade teachers publicly blaming eighth grade teachers for a lack of student content preparation, and that was showing up in the community. Yard duty educators gossiping about a student or administrator. I've seen that so many times that it's almost common. And if I see it when I'm observing in schools, our students are seeing it. And so we're asking students to participate in certain expectations. And when you go around and interview kids, they'll often tell you, it's in their own words, how they see us as adults, sometimes not following our own school-wide rules and expectations or norms. Administrators modeling conflict avoidance or anxiety. Faculty turnover that's really high mid-semester, and there being no process for onboarding in place so that new faculty, when they come in, aren't a part of the culture or the things that we did to set up all the stuff that went on at the very beginning of the year. So being mindful and plan for that. The use of long-term subs or emergency certified educators and the required mentoring that goes on when we have that in place, and how there are inequalities in work because you have teachers mentoring other teachers or trying to bring along folks that may not be fully prepared. So how do we make consideration and time for this? When you engage in universal screening as part of a prevention program, that data gives you a percentage of students who are considered to have an elevated or an extremely elevated level of risk. And that total number is generally about 20% of your population. I've seen it as high as 25, and I've seen it as low as 18. For those of you that have done screening before, I'm sure you have I'm quite sure you have similar experiences. The best gold standard approach is a nationally normed bias reducing screener like the BASC-3 behavior and emotional screening system, of which I am not an author. This can reduce racial bias, it can reduce the bias that happens in office discipline referrals, and it can help with gender norms. But that may not be available for you or be a good fit for the resources that you have at schools. And you can do self-created rating scales, but these can have inherent bias in them. So please use caution. I do think that in many instances that something is better than nothing, but go slow, use caution, and consider what resources are available to you. Engaging in universal screening is so much cheaper than intervention programming later. There are also many other commercially available screeners, such as the Student Risk Screening Scale, the SABRS, the SDQ, the SSBD, and the SSIS. So I just want to let you know that there are a number of those available out there, and which one I think is the best for my experiences and research. I have had lots of experience in schools doing universal screenings, and there are some myths that come up that I want to share with you. The first one is that a school might need to provide somehow special education for everyone identified at risk, all 25% or 18%, and that's not true. The reality is you need local experts to examine the results and see who may need comprehensive assessment. And it's been my experience across the country that is a very, very low number. Most of the students who are at extremely elevated levels of risk are already identified for special education. And there'll be another set that's probably in your assessment pipeline. And then you'll have a few students that will come up and you'll think, gosh, I didn't think about that student as potentially needing services. So you need an expert appropriately trained to take a look at your screening data and see who might need comprehensive assessment as a next step. Another scenario that I've had happen that I call, and this is a direct quote from the administrator, I don't have that many chairs, which was a misunderstanding that these are all headed as discipline cases, and that's not true. The risk includes a large number of variables, and not all students are predetermined to be disciplined cases. And those that are, if you have good prevention programs in place, you're going to reduce problems that you might see later anyway. In the chat room, for those of you that are following along, Chris has put in a number of resources from the CIRET website that provides PowerPoints and a list of screeners. That's Kathleen Lane's work. And others and colleagues out of University of Arizona and University of Kansas. There's also a National Center on Intensive Interventions, Screeners Assessment and Progress Monitoring, and the website's provided there as well. Consider with that data a really proactive approach where you would use small groups either before school or during school, lunchtime. These can be 15, 20-minute sessions. I've seen small groups that happen before school and include breakfast or chocolate milk from the cafeteria or extra food that's brought in. Sometimes they involve recreational settings and rooms. Sometimes these are pull-out groups that happen throughout the school day, or could be at lunch certain days a week. I've seen a number of models for the implementation of these small groups. I've also seen schools redo their schedules where everyone has a small group that they go to, and they utilize all faculty and staff on campus to reappropriate students into smaller groups. And you can do things like role play and conversation starters. So I'll make a plug for my book that there are a number of role play and conversation starters and extended activities that last for 6 weeks of curriculum and have worksheets and tools and suggestions. But there are a number of other things you can do. You could start affinity groups at your school. You could do things where there are academic strategy training sessions to teach kids how to use note-taking strategies or graphic organizers. There are a number of schools using restorative practices or restorative circles across campus. There are schools that are doing some really cool stuff with mindfulness training. There's evidence to support all of these, including peer conflict negotiation and resolution groups, anger management training, parent training, self-monitoring or self-management skills, problem-solving training, moral motivation training, replacement behavior training, verbal mediation, social skills training. All of these have a great deal of evidence and more to support their use in schools with kids for reducing both externalizing and internalizing problems and increasing academic performance. You all may have some of these things started at schools. And if you'd like to share any of that, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to break us up into groups right now and have us talk a little bit about with each other about how your schools provide time or support for prevention programs, if at all. Chris and Aaron and I will pop around to small groups to hear what you have to say. And this is just a time for you to talk to one another across the country and maybe get some ideas or discuss what it is that you're doing. So Chris is going to ping us into groups, and I'll see you in just a little bit.
Kimber, how long are we going to be in groups?
Oh, let's do 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks. Welcome back, everybody. I had a great team. I got to learn a few things. Had some great conversations. Thanks so much to our room for sharing. I hope you all got to hear and learn from one another as well. I'm going to share just a couple of slides again, and then we'll come back. So I learned that it looks a little hodgepodgey out there, depending on where you are. So status or situation normal depends on the vision of school leaders and teams and what people are coming up with. So I encourage you to think about systematically how you can affect change by having things be institutionalized and systematized in ways that don't rely on whoever's in that position from one year to another. I know that's a bigger question. I want to be sure to let you know that next week we're talking about progress monitoring how-to. And so what I'd ask if you're going to come is do a little sleuthing work this week, because we're going to talk about what do you have in place at your current systems for progress monitoring. And most people are going to revert to an academic progress monitoring view. And I'm going to ask you to check in on behavioral progress monitoring. Is it a check in, check out system? Are they using Ames Web or other kinds of systems, Review 360, or are they different grade levels doing different things? Are they still doing the homeschool note on paper? And we'll talk a little bit about what those pieces look like. I'll review some commercially available ones and then teach you how to create your own if that's a better work for you. Also to share that if you are interested in more information or want to follow up with me, that I can be reached at my UVM email, kimberly.vannest@uvm.edu. So we have just a couple minutes in a big group, and I'd like to have some time for Q&A, and also to suggest that I'm not the only person with experience in the room here. We have quite a few of you out there. So does anybody have questions about or considerations for implementing prevention programs? My recommendation here to you today was that one pretty universally acceptable method of a prevention program is, after your universal pieces are in place and you have good buy-in for norms or school-wide expectations, that you consider small groups. And those might be run by teachers or school psychs. There are programs like mine that have lesson plans and examples, starter groups, student-led experiences, but there are others out there, and some of you were sharing them. I don't know if you'd like to talk about that or ask questions or pose challenges for the group think. What's most important to me in these sessions, and why I'm so appreciative of Chris and Aaron and the folks at Pearson letting us do these and talk about products that aren't even Pearson's products, is that we're all in this for the long-term goals of improving the social, emotional, behavioral functioning of the students that we're working with in schools. That's why we're here and what we're ultimately trying to get at. So however you're doing that, we have our favorites, but however you're doing that in schools, that's what we want to see happen. Small groups with teachers. And that can be even within class. Within class, teachers can break up into small groups. And there's sort of a pay now or pay later thing that happens in a classroom, that if you don't spend a little bit of time on the front end addressing, getting kids connected and engaged and interested in whatever it is that you're going to talk to them about for learning, or establishing the norms for how to treat one another socially, you end up spending that time throughout the lesson or at the end, or just dealing with problem behaviors, or kids that are checked out or having emotional crises that can't engage with you anyway. So the time, by ignoring it, you don't get that time back, because it's going to pop up. What I've unfortunately seen happen in too many classrooms is the kind of the hands up approach of, I'm not sure what to do with this percentage of kids, this 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. And so I just sort of ignore those and teach to the group that I can keep with me. So there's a certain degree of educator or each other training and cross training that I think we all benefit from. Tiffany, I'm going to say your screen share picture of could be Yellowstone is going to be my.
It is actually Yellowstone. It is. Yes, ma'am.
All right. It's not the painted pots, but where was it in Yellowstone?
It was over by the big hub with all the little where the hotel is and all the wooden pathways and all that.
By the big geyser.
Yes, the big geysers. Yes.
All right. All right. I'm going to let you all go back to your day of solving the world problems by 3 o'clock, and express my appreciation again for you being here and talking to me and being a part of the conversation. Thanks for the good work you're doing. I know it's really hard, and I know that it's especially hard this year. So if there's anything I can do to help, email me, let me know.
Thank you, Dr. Vannest. We really appreciate your time today.
I've in the chat box, I've put the link to where you can register for the next session or the following sessions, but also we will be putting the recordings of the previous sessions in this session at that link as well. So if you want to, if you missed parts or you missed a previous session, you can find those there. And thank you very much for attending.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Good luck out there today. Be safe.